most powerful figure. Here he says, and you can't put it more bluntly than this. The establishment of the Islamic Emirate in Afghanistan, comprising 25 million Pakistani and 17 million Afghan Pakhtuns, is all right. In fact, it will be the most natural thing to happen and will be governed by the demographic logic. That is, the 25 million Pakhtun majority in Pakistan will maintain a strong pull over the 17 million Afghan Pakhtuns, thus reducing the utility of the Durand line. Historically, it's his concluding sentence, historically, the king in Kabul has always needed the nod from Pakistani tribals to govern Afghanistan. This is truer even now when kings have been replaced by popular leaders. It is, some of them, they want Afghanistan to be a fifth province. People like us, the leftists, we say no, it is their country. You mind your business. And that is what we hold on to, and we have held on to since 47. Things have changed a bit. There has been pressure, of course, from Russia. China used to support the Mujahideen. They've given up supporting them because the Mujahideen forces, right-wing forces, have started to attack them in Xi'an province itself, too. India has always pressed them that don't do this, don't do this. Saudi Arabia. There has been great pressure by the Americans on them and by the West that you stop it. You just stop it. We don't need turmoil anymore. And so you've seen in the press, I have been in this country for 40 years, 39 years. We have written letter after letter. People have tried to write article after article against the Saudis and what they have been doing. It would never get published. In the past 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, the number of articles that have appeared in the mass media against the Saudis is phenomenal. And what has changed it? The Saudis haven't changed. Their attitudes towards women, towards Shia, towards everybody else is the same. What's happened is that they've gotten too big for their britches. They think that they can rock the world. And the Americans are telling them that, look, 1 million, 2 million refugees are making their way to Europe. We've got to have peace in Syria, in Libya, and you got to pull back. That's one, and the fall in the price of oil. They cannot cover their budget. It was $100 billion shortfall last year, or in this year, that they will have. So Pakistan is not getting money from Saudi Arabia as they used to. The Americans have cut them off. And the next thing Americans will do is that they will start naming Pakistani generals and Pakistani figures and sanctioning them. And they will do the same thing for the Saudis if they don't listen. So in Pakistan now, there's a very strong struggle going on between the highest levels of the government. One says the Americans will leave. We've got a game that we can build on. We will still control Kabul. They say it. India has 6 consulates in Afghanistan. They shouldn't have them. We say they have 6, you have 10 consulates. But then you've got to have tourism and trade and commercial relations. So some army generals, they want to continue the war. Other army generals are saying, stop it. And that is why we have seen the fight against the Mujahideen and the Taliban in the federally administered tribal areas which border Afghanistan with Pakistan. We want the left in Pakistan, the left here. We want peaceful relations. We are totally opposed to the regime in Saudi Arabia. But we don't think that it is anybody's task to go in and overthrow that regime. It is the task of the Saudi people to do so, right? And so we can give them our moral support. Similarly, we want that no more war, no more fundamentalism, no more attacks against Afghanistan, overt or covert, should take place from Pakistan. We have tried to do this for 30 odd years in Canada, and the left in Pakistan has tried to do that for even longer. I hope that we will have peace between the two countries soon. I thank you.
So we are going to conclude quickly, but let me just speak about Afghanistan today very briefly. Today, Afghanistan is not what it was before the disposal of President Mohammed Daoud Khan. Today, Afghanistan's government, its laws, its military, its border patrol, and its police department are being rebuilt from scratch. The significant progress in the fields of human rights, infrastructure, and equality, which took decades upon decades to achieve, was wiped clean. Today, we have a generation of Afghan men and women who were born and raised in a time of heavy violence and radicalization. So now that we've briefly covered the history, now that we have already had nearly a consensus among most of us, what specific political action can be taken? Many people focus on one of two things, either government corruption or imperialism or both. Although both these issues are incredibly important and should be addressed, and I thank Omar for his presentation, the detail that he went into, what we at Afghans Against Extremism focus on as our starting point is the Afghan-Pakistan border. So why the border is our starting point, and how do we get it done specifically? The Afghan border, also known as the Durand Line, is almost completely unsecured. The reason for this is because, as mentioned earlier, there is a dispute between the Afghan and Pakistani government on the location of that border. Terrorist organizations such as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have historically used the unsecured border to enter Afghanistan from Pakistan, violate human rights, and impose their own rule in Afghanistan, while at the same time using that border to reach safe havens in Pakistan and resupply and recruit. Whether we're talking about the violation of women's rights, or children's rights, or human rights in general, and I only make the distinction for specificity, none of these issues can be solved unless we eliminate the cause. By securing the border, we prevent these groups from further radicalizing and recruiting the youth and entering the country. When the source for extremist culture is removed, then and only then can Afghanistan begin to rebuild and expand its infrastructure to connect rural and isolated communities to cities, hold its government accountable, improve and expand civil rights, and promote stability in the region. Securing the Afghan-Pakistan border will, 1, prevent the Taliban and other extremist groups such as ISIS from infiltrating Afghanistan and recruiting. 2, prevent extremist groups already within Afghanistan from seeking safe havens in Pakistan. 3, place the Afghan government in a strong position to negotiate with the Pakistani government and military to stop funding and arming Taliban officials and other extremist groups. 4, halt the halt the expansion of radicalization and secure the Afghan government real control over its territories. To us, securing the border is such an important issue because it is something that the Afghan government can do. But in order to secure the border, the Afghan government must first acknowledge the Durand Line as the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which has already been in place for over 100 years. One of the immediate steps it could take towards securing the border is to increase the Afghan border patrol, which is currently numbered at roughly 14,000 in a country which has a 3,600 international mile border. Afghanistan gains nothing from its open border policy because according to international law, and as Omar said earlier, successive states maintain the same border with their neighbors, which means Pakistan was under no obligation to negotiate with Afghanistan regarding its border after the formation of Pakistan in 1947. As far as self-determination is concerned, the people in these territories have no interest in joining Afghanistan. They do not consider themselves as part of the Afghan state. This is the reason Mohammed Daoud Khan had to step down as prime minister in 1963. How long and how many lives will it cost before the Afghan government realizes that it will never be able to stop these extremist groups at the cost of the silly notion of reunification, which the majority of Afghans are indifferent towards? The Pakistani government and military must stop interfering in Afghanistan, but the truth is they never will unless they have a real incentive to do so. Because the Afghan government refuses to even acknowledge the border, it's actually negotiating with the Taliban on issues like women's rights, which should be non-negotiable. President Ashraf Ghani is negotiating with the Pakistani government, which claims to be trying to combat extremism, when a Reuters article just a few months ago explained that many senior officials of the Taliban are currently living comfortably in the Pakistani city of Quetta and occasionally holding meetings in their living rooms. The sad truth is that although the Pakistani government and military arm, fund, and provide safe havens for terrorists, neither the Pakistani or the Afghan government are really serious about stopping these groups. The border patrol, which I just mentioned, which is numbered at, again, roughly 14,000, is not only understaffed, but also ripe with political corruption, because there is no real will to secure the border. Afghans Against Extremism stands resolute the securing the Afghan-Pakistan border is one of the most important issues, if not the most important issue, in Afghanistan, because only by securing the border can we make lasting progress in the field of such things as civil rights. Thank you. So we're going to have a couple minutes for Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
Go ahead.
I have a question for Omar and Team. What is the progressive Pakistani-Canadian stance on the former Prime Minister Musharraf?
President Musharraf, he was an army CNC, and we were opposed to any army rule in Pakistan, so we we disagreed with his rule. And he had overthrown an elected government at that time.
Okay. I do have a question. Shiraz wants to go.
You can go.
One thing I did forget to mention, that it was in April of 1988 that there was the Geneva Accord between Pakistan and Afghanistan, in which each country solemnly, as an international treaty, agreed that they would not interfere in each other's affairs. And there was a corollary to it, which was guaranteed by the Soviet Union at that time and the United States. And the corollary was that the Soviet Union would give a set timeline for the withdrawal of its troops, which began that fall, and in February of 1989, all Soviet troops were gone, or Soviet troops were gone. If the war had been against the presence of Soviet troops in Afghanistan, it would have stopped then, no? It didn't. It went on and on and on. And so the point I was trying to make was that there were far greater reasons for this involvement of the West and the Saudis in Afghanistan.
Go ahead.
Did Iran and its revolution, Khomeini, Khamenei, and Pahlavi had any role taking place between the relationship between Afghanistan, the Pashtuns, and Pakistan?
Do you guys want to answer? I mean, I don't want to be answering.
No, you can go ahead.
So, the Shah of Iran is something like what it is Saudi Arabia is today. Totally dependent on the West and on the United States for his power. He was a very brutal ruler. Like his Savak, the security agencies, killed tens of thousands of Iranians who did anything politically opposed or wanted liberalization out there. Iran had a very influential role to play in Kabul in the early 70s. But then, as these developments are taking place in 1978 and 79 in Afghanistan, the Iranians were caught up in their own revolution, where the Shah was completely weakened because of the Khomeiniite upsurge in power, and then in February of 79, he was overthrown. So Iran didn't play that active a role in Afghanistan, accepting to provide refuge to some of the Hazarajat who went towards that side from the Balochistan side towards there.
We have a question.
So it was mentioned that the Soviets had a lot of impact in Afghanistan, but when we're looking at it currently, what about America's impact and Canada's? Actually, Canada plays because I was looking towards more economic sovereignty. So you guys are talking about physical borders, right? And that impacts the government, the social, stability of Afghanistan. What about economic? Because that's more it's a little bit more fluid, right?
Sure. So you're asking about the America's involvement with the
because
other.
we're talking about the physical borders, but what about the actual sovereignty, government sovereignty that can't be really secured by just securing the borders, because such thing as economic.
Right. So the reason, sure. So the reason why we focus on the borders as I said, as our starting point, was because you can't really have anything the government necessarily tries to do right now, whether it's trying to build infrastructure or expand civil liberties or anything like that, right? You can't have that when you constantly have another group coming in,
Right.
recruiting, further radicalizing people. So your own people, for example, what happened to, I mentioned, Farkhunda in Kabul, that was just done by regular civilians, right? The government has to try and reinforce the law. So There are a lot of issues in Afghanistan, which we agree. But you need to pick a spot where you start and move forward from there. The reason we picked the border as an issue is because we feel the border affects every other issue in Afghanistan. So whether it's economic rights or violation of human rights or anything like that, when you begin to expel the source for extremist culture and some of the repressive forces in the country, then and only then can you make lasting progress. Otherwise, any progress you make will just go down the drain.
So is that more like a grassroots?
It does. So this has to definitely. Afghanistan has a history of resisting outsiders. So any change that comes to Afghanistan, it's incredibly important that it has to be done by grassroots inside Afghanistan. Otherwise, they'll just reject it.
One other thing though, borders, right? The border between Pakistan and Iran, it's a very unpatrollable border, very rough terrain, very sparse population, and yet Pakistan will not allow Jandallah to go and attack targets in Iran. They control the border. They will not allow anybody to go into Saudi or anywhere else, into the United Arab Emirates or whatever. So what's the problem here? The problem is that there isn't the same united willpower to stop these cross-border interactions and whatever. So from Pakistan side into Afghanistan. So I personally think that walls like Trump is trying to build, that's a racist one, but maybe a wall between Afghanistan and Pakistan might help. I'm joking. What needs to be done is that it has to be a collective security agreement, which has to include Afghanistan, Pakistan, Russia, India, and China, and Iran, which will unitedly govern and ensure that this terrorism, which is based in Pakistan, which is spearheaded by Pakistan, is stopped. And your point about economic aid, right? They spent hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, the Americans and the West, the other 40 countries, to carry out the war there. Once they were done with their task of moving the Soviets back and their own guys in, the Mujahideen and then the Taliban, well, they said, like, to hell with you, and very, very little dollars were then spent on social projects in Afghanistan, which Afghanistan or any other country desperately needs.
One more thing to add to that really quickly. One of the reasons why Dawood initially went to the Soviet Union seeking aid was because America began to aid and fund Pakistan as well early on, right? Which created sort of an imbalance in the region. In order to offset that balance, which is one of the original reasons why Dawood went to the Soviet Union initially. So the involvement in that country from the very beginning just sort of let it downhill.
So would you say that was at the beginning of?
Well, I mean, that's you could argue that. So I mean, I'm sure other people might say that's not it. They would go either further back or a little bit more forward, but that was definitely a crucial factor. Yes.
And I think you could say that it could be argued that if that was the source, then that should be like the root of not the root of the whole problem, but it had a detrimental impact.
Yes.
So we should go back to that to figure out how to prevent Western involvement in Afghanistan. I think that even though like it's not very obvious, I think that is a really big issue there.
Well, in terms of Western ideas, like Afghanistan to one extent or another has been influenced by Western ideals, like Amin-Ullah Khan, right? Some of his reforms were influenced by the West, or by things he went on travel. So we can't entirely eliminate it, I think, especially today. But it is something very important to address.
Can I ask a few questions?
Yes.
Some questions. Okay, first, Mr. Mahan, the question is, the things you said, collaborate all together. I will put it this way. I just want to know. Give me a few reasons why are really distinct, or let's say the perfect generals or president, why they get killed and by who they're getting killed actually. You cannot say exactly American or this. I want to know specifically what you think.
Were you asking about the journalists inside Afghanistan?
Inside
That's what we
Afghanistan,
know.
generals.
I believe